In early July 2022, Mrs. Barnes was visiting Barmouth. She came there alone, although it seems that she saw some friends or acquaintances during her visit. In the course of Sunday the 10th of July 2022, she was thinking about where to stay that night. It seems that someone made an arrangement for her to stay at the Wavecrest B&B a few doors away from your house in Marine Parade. We know that in the late afternoon and early evening she was walking in Barmouth. She bought some food and drink. The evidence suggests that she was significantly under the influence of alcohol. At 10 p.m. she approached your house. The only suggested explanation for this is that she mistook your house for the B&B where she had a booking. The door was unlocked and she went in. It seems that, meeting nobody in the front hall, she went upstairs and installed herself in what was in fact your bedroom. At that time, you and your partner were in another room in the house watching television. In the course of the day, you'd had quite a substantial amount to drink. At about 10:45 p.m, you and your partner decided to go to bed. You found your bedroom locked from the inside. You got a spare key, and when the two of you entered the room, you were astonished to find Mrs. Barnes in the bed, holding a drink in her hand, possessions scattered around, with a smell of cigarette smoke. It seemed to you that she had tampered with some of your possessions too. Your first reaction was entirely appropriate. You asked her what she was doing in your home. You've said that her replies were contradictory or confused. At 10:52 p.m, you telephoned the police, told them calmly about the situation, and asked them to send someone to remove Mrs. Barnes. But after that, things went terribly wrong. You rejoined your partner and Mrs. Barnes in the bedroom. There was some sort of confrontation. When told that the police had been called, you've said that Mrs. Barnes responded aggressively, and she accused your partner of stealing her handbag and lunged towards her. It seems that this was the trigger for what happened next. The jury has found that you assaulted Mrs. Barnes with a kick or a stamp. That kick or stamp must have been inflicted with considerable force. The evidence of a pathologist told us that Mrs. Barnes sustained a catastrophic injury, including 3 broken ribs and an injury to her liver, which, in the opinion of the pathologist, was unsurvivable. That's the crime of which you've been convicted. Immediately afterwards, you dragged Mrs. Barnes by her ankles down the stairs to the ground floor. You then flung her wheeled suitcase out into the front yard. Your partner then led Mrs. Barnes outside, supporting her by her arm. We've seen that on CCTV. It's clear that your partner acted gently and carefully in her contact with this 71-year-old lady who at that time was unsteady on her feet. You then came outside, and your behaviour towards Mrs. Barnes was aggressive and offensive. You sat on an outside chair and watched her in an aggressive or threatening attitude while she crouched on the ground trying to gather her possessions together. During that time, you remained present, as did some of the neighbours, and for much of the time, your partner. Your partner and 2 of the neighbours in particular behaved appropriately. They could see Mrs. Barnes was in trouble. They stayed by her, tended her as best they could, and tried to summon assistance. At least she received compassionate care from them during her last hours. Your behaviour, however, remained inappropriate and insulting. When a neighbour asked you to call an ambulance, you refused, so the neighbour called the ambulance herself. You did bring some cushions for Mrs. Barnes and a drink of water, and on one occasion take her pulse when asked to do so, and I've not overlooked those matters of detail. I can understand why you might have escorted her out of your house, though a different person might have responded to this situation by trying to help her. But the assault, a kick or stamp of sufficient force to cause a fatal injury, was a dreadful thing to do to a defenceless elderly person. We've heard moving victim impact statements from members of Mrs. Barnes's family, for whom her loss has been devastating. She was a much-loved wife, mother, and grandmother. The sentence for murder is life imprisonment. The minimum term will be 14 years. The time which you've spent on remand, 238 days, will be deducted from the time you must now serve, making a net minimum term of 13 years and 127 days.